Hunt with passion. Never stop casting. Chase the dream. Welcome to Season 7 of Musky Mastery Outdoors, brought to you by Joe Bucher Outdoors, #1 in big game fish products. Recon Boats, made by craftsmen, built for fishermen, and by Great Lakes Potato Chips. Snack happy, every chip, every bag. Hey everybody, what's up, and welcome back to another video here on the Musky Mastery YouTube channel. Well folks, welcome to another installment of the Whiteboard vlog series. This is installment number 4 on our Mastering Muskies series, beginner to expert, where we are covering topics in increasing complexity, starting from the most beginner video, which was again now 3 videos back. Please, if you're new to this content, go check that out and work your way up to the 4th video in our segment, which is now going to be called a little bit of a lesson, and maybe we should just call it a discussion more so than anything on musky behavior, because Muskellunge behavior has been talked about, well, since anglers have been chasing muskies. We're trying to understand these amazing fish and, what makes them tick. And so that's what we're going to try to touch on tonight. The idea behind this, by the way, as we get going here is, look, of course, in the first episode, we discussed like the basics of musky fishing, rods, reels, tackle, just general stuff you want if you're just getting started in this sport. Of course, there's a lot more where that, came from. But again, we're just trying to wrap this up, in this series to make it something that is getting you started from beginner and hopefully by the end of this becoming a little bit of an expert maybe, or at least you're going to feel pretty good about what you're doing out there on the water. But so far we've covered, really structure and cover. We've talked about where to locate muskies, and we talked about that seasonally as water temperatures change over the course of a season. And I really thought that in this next installment, we would really now talk about muskellunge behavior. Again, that just seemed like the natural progression for me, talking about location, muskie movement, and now that we know where muskies are hiding, well, now we should start talking about their behavior and their tendencies, because after that, we'll talk about how to approach them with different lures and a whole variety of other topics to come. But that's kind of the idea here. And as in every Whiteboard episode that you've seen thus far, we're going to kick it off with some listener Q&A here. So thank you for everybody, first of all, for watching. Thank you for listening on the Musky Therapy podcast, on YouTube, on Facebook, wherever you're watching this content. Thanks for being a part of the Musky Mastery family. And again, I'm just going to give a little shout out to our sponsors that make all of this happen for us. Of course, Joe Bucher Outdoors, Recon Boats, and Great Lakes Potato Chips. These companies make all of this content possible, so thank you to them for all their amazing products that they offer. And we'll start here with our Q&A. All right, this first question is from Adam, and he says, hey, could you please touch on matching the hatch in a little bit more depth, with consideration of sunny versus cloudy, stained water versus clear water, morning and afternoon, incorporating those variables. So, first of all, for those of you who are listening, what is match the hatch? Well, match the hatch is just this simple idea that if in your particular body of water, here we have a new Lake X, so be on the lookout for this in northern Wisconsin or wherever you are fishing, whether it's Pennsylvania, Illinois, Minnesota, wherever. Be on the lookout for this lake. Maybe it's real. Anyway, back to Adam's question. So if in our Lake X, let's say this lake is dominated by yellow perch, and that seems to be the primary, forage that those muskies in this particular lake are eating, you might want to be fishing a lure that has some bars or stripes on it. So I'll give you 2 examples here if I can get them out. Okay. Here we go. So let me get these out here. Actually, I'll give you a couple different examples here. So if I am fishing a body of water with yellow perch and I want to, let's say, match the hatch, okay? I, of course, might look to a lure such as this. This is JBO's Hot Perch color. It's a brand new color for 2025. And here, that was the regular size 8-inch DR. Here's the 6-inch baby depth rater. I just wanted to show you both of them there. This would be considered matching the hatch. You can clearly see the bars on this lure. It's got orange. Perch have orange in them. It's, you know, and by the way, that orange doesn't even look orange underwater once you bring it underwater. But really the big thing that I'm looking for here is the barring. And by barring we mean it's going to have contrast here, of course, between the you know, yellow and the chartreuse color and the orange, okay? So there's some contrast there. And if muskies happen to be keying in on a prey species that have contrasting colors on them, this might be a really good lure to throw. Now, if on the other hand, maybe the primary forage in your particular body of water is something like a shad, okay? So shad, you know, are generally speaking one color throughout, although they have a white belly. But shad are kind of a golden yellow color, maybe a white kind of opaquish color, depending on the body of water you're fishing. This might be, this is a Great Flame, you know, 7-inch shallow rater here. This might be a good idea if you're matching the hatch with a lure, or sorry, with a prey species that is maybe a single color throughout. So this has more of a, you know, even though there is some contrast from a darker top, and you can see a little, you know, green or yellow here on the belly section there. It's a little, you know, there's no contrasting bars. You know, you don't have any, you know, vertical bars here. So again, you could even, so of course now these are match the hatch here. You're saying, well, Chaz, this doesn't even look like a perch. This, you know, this hot perch color. Well, again, you got to remember that these colors look a lot different underwater. As light penetration decreases, colors change. Pinks look brown, oranges look more brown, but you still will be able to get contrast. If you've ever gone snorkeling or even scuba diving and you go down a couple feet, especially in dirty water, you can make out your browns, your blacks, your grays, but the deeper you go, the harder it becomes to pick out actual colors, and you see more darker shades, your blacks or your whites. So you get more contrasting colors. So that's just the basics with regard to matching the hatch, you know, if you want to match the hatch. Now, some folks will argue, you know, if you've got a lake like our Lake X here that is just loaded with yellow perch, maybe you want to unmatch the hatch. Maybe you want to throw something that is completely foreign and looks totally different, and, you know, you're going to maybe like hone in on a muskie's, you know, interest in seeking out a prey item that's kind of not in, you know, it's out of the normal, right? So it's maybe somewhere it shouldn't be. It's something that maybe it looks a different color because it's dying and it's lost blood or whatever it might be. But bottom line, that's the idea behind Match the Hatch, picking a lure, color, or pattern that closely emulates what the muskies are probably feeding on pretty consistently, at least at that time of the year. Now, with regard to seasonality, and here's another example, by the way. This is sunset. So this is, again, that's got some contrast. So it just depends what, you know, and this might be Match the Hatch for something like if, you know, if you've got a, I fish a body of water where the muskies feed primarily on stunted hammer-handled pike. You might want to throw some big profile lure like the, you know, the 9-inch mag shallow rater to kind of emulate even though this color isn't the color of a northern pike, obviously, the size profile is something that on that particular body of water, muskies are keying in on that profile, and that, you know, so that's another thing to think about. Sometimes matching the hatch doesn't necessarily mean matching the color. Matching the hatch can be matching profile, it can be matching barring and contrast. So there's more to matching the hatch, in my humble opinion, than just simply trying to match the color. Of course, we've got more natural colors, you know, that we could pull out. Actually, most of the lures here that I have in the tray tonight, although here, this is a more natural color. My good friend Joe Bucher and I call this color Texas tea, but I guess the official name here is Cisco on the Slotmaster spoon here. It's kind of a gold, kind of a Goldilocks with a black and gold tinsel skirt there on the spoon. So this is maybe, I would consider this a little bit more of a natural color, kind of a walleye color. So even though I'm not a believer that muskies are like, eating all the walleyes, if you're, perhaps trying to find, maybe like smallmouth bass. I've had muskies eat smallies off my line when I'm walleye fishing or whatnot. I've had muskies eat walleyes, but sometimes that gold color seems to work really well. Not that I ever throw Goldilocks. Just kidding. But that would be more of a natural color. And, Adam, when it comes to, morning, evening, sunny, cloudy, I mean, I would say those kind of environmental changes and, light changes, those daylight changes from, dawn to dusk, those color patterns maybe would follow a more, I guess, more of a generalized color scheme, I guess, if I'm making sense of that. Meaning that if I have cloudy conditions, perhaps I might be throwing something like black and nickel as far as a blade color. Or maybe if I'm fishing a sunny day and a clear water, I might be throwing Elvis. I might be throwing kind of a white bucktail and a chartreuse or something like that. I've always done really well on clearer bodies of water with black and chartreuse and white and chartreuse. Chartreuse seems to just really shine for me on clearer bodies of water for whatever reason. Pink's always been really good on clear bodies of water. So, the match the hatch thing, I'm really looking more so at the contrasting of colors to try to match whatever I'm, trying to emulate. So not really focus as much more on the time of the day, although you could incorporate those variables as well. And I think color is going to be something that we talk about. It's kind of a little bit more we could make anything advanced, but kind of an advanced topic that we'll talk about a little later down the road. So, Adam, I hope that clears things up with Match the Hatch, and we can talk about that in a little more detail later. Okay, here's another question from Andy. Can you discuss in a bit more detail the fish cribs you referenced in the last episode? What are they? What are the characteristics that make those up? Okay, let's put a fish crib in. Okay, I'm just going to draw kind of what I might, say is just kind of a tic-tac-toe board here. Here we've got some fish cribs on this big reef. Let's put our compass rose in here: north, south, east, and west. Okay, so this hump, which is on the southern side of the lake, this reef, I should say. Let's be good with our structure terminology here. I'd call this more of a reef connected to the mainland here. It's got some fish cribs. And what is a fish crib exactly, Andy? A fish crib is man-made structure. It is essentially a treehouse or a log home with gaps in between the logs. Usually in northern Wisconsin, I believe they're made out of 6-inch diameter maple, but boy, we got so many thousands and thousands of fish cribs in our waters. They were probably made with a lot of different things many years ago. So anyway, getting back to fish cribs. So it's pretty much a log house underwater that's stuffed with brush. So essentially you've got kind of a foundation of sorts. They kind of look like this, I guess, if you will. This is probably my best rendition of a fish crib. They kind of look something like that. If you can see, maybe you can zoom in on your iPad here. And a fish crib is essentially stuffed with, you've got this like treehouse type of a shell, and then it's just stuffed with brush. And there's all kinds of junk hanging out. I'm actually pretty impressed with my fish crib here that I drew. That's a massive fish crib just here outside the mouth of this channel. So, where do fish cribs come from? Well, the Department of Natural Resources, they might be dumping these into lakes. You might have individuals like myself who might get a permit and register a fish crib with the DNR. So you can do that legally. A lot of folks will put fish cribs in right off their dock. You have to register these. And I haven't looked into this process in a long time. I was kind of obsessed with this kind of thing when I was a younger musky hunter, younger kid. But you can, I believe it's still legal, at least in the state of Wisconsin, to sink your own fish crib if you make them to their specifications. I don't know that they come and look at them. They might actually inspect them, but they might not. A lot of people put them on the ice, and in the spring they fall through. I believe that's how the DNR puts them in. But fish cribs are just man-made structure. A lot of times you'll find fish cribs located in areas that don't have a lot of other structure. So fish cribs might be in, typically found in, a lot of bodies of water. Sometimes where there's not, like I said, not structure, like weed structure, or we could call it cover, weed cover, things like that. And so these are man-made structures that help congregate numbers of fish so that, licensed anglers who, have paid their dues to go and catch fish. Now there's something that attracts fish, and anglers that want to get a better chance at catching fish and are having a tough time. Maybe there's a lake that doesn't have a lot of structure. There's no weeds, very little weed cover or something like that. Well, how can you, outside of basin fishing, if you don't have forward-facing sonar? I mean, I don't have it. It can be really tough to locate fish when there's not a lot of structure. Fish cribs, or these log homes for fish that are underwater, they're structure, and they're a place for fish to hide along their travel route, or maybe they may even set up residency at one of these places or something like that for some period of time. But regardless, they attract critters like perch and crappies and bluegills and minnow species and you name it, and of course they attract muskies. So I fish cribs all the time. Some cribs are better than others, and muskies, generally speaking, maybe I'll draw them in here on, muskies will be usually not in the cribs. This red thing here is a muskie, but they're usually out and about around the fish cribs. So they're usually around here or something like this. So when I'm fishing cribs, I don't necessarily need to be super close. Your lure doesn't necessarily need to fall right on the crib when you're muskie fishing, or if you're trolling for muskies and I'm trolling this break line here, does your lure need to land on the actual crib? Absolutely not. But cribs attract fish, and they're man-made structure to help in that fish catching process. So Andy, I hope that that kind of gives you a little bit more of an idea about fish cribs, and they're definitely something to look into and fish. A lot of times, by the way, clubs will dump fish cribs in, and you can find even fish crib books. A lot of the times the books out there now have fish cribs and ways to identify them with different houses, or it's 20 foot in 18 feet of water, looking at this particular boathouse, and blah blah blah, and then you can find the crib. And if you got a any type of unit, even just a regular 2D sonar, you can drive around long enough, find the fish crib, throw a buoy over the side, throw a marker over, and there you are. You're on your fish crib. So there you have it. Okay, thanks, Andy, for that question. Okay, Joe asks, you mentioned free spooling. I have seen you do this countless times on your videos, and also heard it, because you can definitely hear the free spooling, the spool running through my thumb, the re-engaging of the spool, the clicking of all sorts of stuff like that. So I've heard it. What are the concepts behind this? Why and when should I do this? So for those of you who are not familiar, free spooling is when you're hooked up with a muskie, and instead of utilizing the drag system on your reel, whichever reel you might be using, which again is when the fish pulls line, the spool is able to give, so to speak, and allow the fish to pull some line out under pressure, heavier or lighter depending on how heavy you set your drag, okay? But if you're not utilizing the drag, you might want to consider something like free spooling in a couple situations. So free spooling is a tactic where instead of utilizing that drag, you're going to open the spool, you're going to hit the button or whatever type of system you have in your reel, and essentially the spool can now rotate freely, meaning the muskie that is now hooked can take umpteen amounts of line out, unless, well, you're going to use your thumb to keep tension on the spool, okay? So essentially, free spooling is, for lack of a better term, it is, a drag system in manual, where my thumb now, once I hit the button and I allow the spool to let line go freely, I can manually change the amount of pressure on the spool and kind of allow the muskie to take as much or as little line as I would like, okay? So it is a manual drag system. So that's the idea behind free spooling, okay? If you want to disengage free spool, click the reel handle forward and now you're locked up and you'll be utilizing your regular drag system. If you want to engage free spool again, just hit the button and use your thumb as your manual drag system, allowing as much or as little line to be taken by the fish during the fight. Now, that's the idea behind free spooling. Why would you do this? There's a number of reasons you'd want. First of all, I'm going to bring up a big muskie, okay? Let's say you've got a muskie that can break tackle, can straighten hooks, you name it, it's going to do something nasty, and you've got this fish close to the boat. Usually free spooling takes place 95% of the time for me. If you watch any of my content, it takes place close to the boat, okay? I'm not going to free spool a muskie on the end of a long bomb cast. That would just be kind of silly if you think about it. But at close range, if you've got a muskie that's very powerful and maybe your drag is a little tight, maybe you don't have it set quite right, and all of a sudden your rod's about to hit the side of the boat and your drag's not giving weight, free spool the fish. Allow the fish to take line under the pressure of your thumb to tire the fish out, and essentially, it's acting as a drag system, but you get to control the amount of tension the fish is feeling as it fights. So if you've got a big muskie that, if you're fearful that your drag might just be set too tight, or for whatever reason, the drag's not being pulled out at the rate you'd like, free spool. You can let that fish take line as you'd like, okay? So that's one reason to use free spool. If I've got a big muskie and it's gonna blast something, I'm gonna let it run a little bit, tire it out. If I've got a fish that's hooked really poorly, let's say it's hooked on the side of the face, or unfortunately it happens sometimes in the eyeball or on its back or something, and it doesn't look like it's hooked really well, I will oftentimes free spool to fight the fish a little bit more gingerly to see if I can tire the fish out and hopefully get the fish into the net without pulling a hook or a barb loose that's stuck in kind of a crappy spot on the fish. So when a fish is not hooked really well, a lot of times I'll free spool them to tire them out and see if I can put the bag on them and score a touchdown. So those are a couple just general ideas behind free spooling. So Joe, I hope that helps answer your question. Okay, so this is from Jin Hythis. I hope I'm saying your name correct. It says, on a future episode, this question says, could you please provide a screenshot of what perch and other baitfish look like on side imaging and down imaging? Yes, so right here, they're showing up somewhere on your screen. Here is an image of what perch look like on side imaging and what perch look like on down imaging. They are, generally speaking, the shadows of fish and the actual images of smaller fish, perch and other types of bait fish like rock bass or even walleyes, for example. the bigger the fish, the bigger the actual yellow mark, or the bigger the mark and the bigger the shadow, okay? Smallmouth bass tend to look a little more pan-shaped. They look like little frying pans with forked tails. Their shadows do. They're just generally smaller. Walleye shadows are deceivingly small on side imaging, and it seems that the smaller the fish gets, they're just these little round circles, these black little circles as shadows. So generally speaking, they just look like thin, maybe elongated circles. The shadows do. Ciscos, they're just yellow marks on your screen. Down imaging, you'll see a similar. You're not really seeing the shadow as much on down imaging, but you're seeing that mark from the actual fish or whatever depth it's hanging at. So. I hope that helps answer your question, just seeing these images, and and if you want more in-depth conversation on that, we can certainly do that. Next question from a different Andy. Here it is. The question is to understand all of those different types of forage muskies hunt, seasonal locations, how they relate to structure and how they behave, etc. Perhaps this is a good topic for a future vlog, Andy, I say yes to that. I think it's a fascinating topic. It's something we don't talk enough about in the just in the sport of musky fishing, although I happen to do quite a bit of research on a few fish species that muskies prey on, such as tullibees. We got your ciscos, your yellow perch. Those are two species, and bluegills. I would say bluegills and panfish. I do quite a bit of research just on and off sometimes on their just when they're spawning and where they change their locations. Crappies would be another good example over the course of a season. Okay, so that's something we'll definitely talk about. That's definitely a higher end topic with regard to forage location and forage movement. But it's definitely just a good question in general. Like if you're trying to hunt the tertiary predator, the muskie, you've got to understand what makes them tick. And if you want to really get better at musky fishing, you need to understand the food that they eat, okay? The food that they eat is really important to understand. So think about that, definitely a topic for the future. And now, with no further ado, I'm gonna get into musky behavior, guys. Here we go. So, thank you again for those questions. If you have more questions, please leave those in the comments section below. I will do my best to address them. I love the questions, guys. I love the Q&A. I hope that I do it justice. So let's have some fun here. Let's talk about musky behavior. Maybe we'll even get to talk about Lake X a little bit here, so we'll see. But the first thing that I wanted to, and I kind of hit on this in episode 1 of the vlog series for this 2025 whiteboard series that we've done. And that's just the inquisitive nature. And we're just going to call this the basics with musky behavior, right? So everybody out there knows muskies are the fish of 10,000 casts. And again, I have talked about this, but that's an actual stat that's not even too far off, right? Depending on where you fish, a legal size muskie now in northern Wisconsin on a lot of our waters, this is at least 40 inches, okay? A legal muskie takes your average angler about, a little over 7,000 casts, maybe, 7,800 casts, I think was the last number that I saw years ago, but, somewhere between 7,000 and 8,000 casts. That's a lot of casts, considering you might cast, a little over 1,000 times over a 10-hour day on the water, right? So it might take the average angler out there, 7 days to catch a muskie. If they go on vacation, maybe they walk away with one good muskie, and hey, that's awesome. But look, muskies are tough to catch, and for many reasons, right? They're the highest on the food chain, right? So they, there's nothing, outside of muskies and maybe big pike and maybe giant walleyes, really, muskies for all intents and purposes are on the top of the food chain. They're a tertiary predator. There's less muskies per fishable acre, okay? So there's just, the bottom line is there's less muskies out there. And you might say that this affects their behavior. It really doesn't. They're oftentimes thought of as rarer to encounter, but that's just because it's in response to them. They're just being lower numbers of muskies, right? It's like if you go out looking for bluegills, it's really not that hard, in my humble opinion. Although at some point in everybody's career, bluegills have been tough to find. Actually, in the most brutal cold front in the world, bluegills might be tough to find because they won't bite. But point being that there's just less per fishable acre. And look, muskies are inquisitive. They follow a lot, okay? And that's an understatement. Muskies follow. It's actually one of the most unique things about the muskies. They follow a lot. Many fish follow lures, but muskies are definitely unique in that they stick with you in the figure eight, okay? We're going to talk about the figure eight in more detail. As I mentioned, we'll have some more detailed topics coming in this vlog series, but, that's something unique to muskies. And this following behavior, I think it really is predatory in nature, right? I think that, muskies, and I'm going to talk about this at some point, but muskies have this, I think they have an instinctual trigger inside of them that when something looks out of place or something comes past them that's maybe, even as fast as you think you're burning a bucktail, man, it is in slow motion compared to the speed of a bluegill or whatever the heck else muskies might be eating that particular day. But, muskies see something that's out of place. I think it's tough for them to say no, right? Especially if they're in at least even a neutral mood, they might come and investigate. Now, what is that investigating from? Is it territorial? Are muskies trying to kick things out of their range? This is possible. I suspect a lot of it's predatory in nature, that they are curious to see what something's doing. I think they're instinctually programmed to go after things that are just out of place. So I think muskies follow things because they are genetically predispositioned to take advantage of things that are just doing something wrong. And so I think it's really hard for muskies to turn down seeing something that is just too easy, right? But why are they only just following? And again, some of this could be territorial, some of it could be curiosity. I'm not trying to say that muskies are maybe as smart as dolphins or something like that, because they're not. But I think a lot of this, this following behavior is learned behavior. And, I think this cautious nature of muskies can really stem from over a long period of time. And remember now, muskies are long-lived, fish. The oldest documented fish, I believe, in the Muskellunge world is, upwards of 30 years old, right? I mean, consider a 30-year-old muskie. How many anglers have encountered that fish, caught it and released it? I mean, a muskie, I don't know. I'd have to look this up. What the average amount of times a muskie might have been caught on a particular body of water. Obviously, it depends how much fishing pressure is present and things like that. But muskies are caught many times over the course of their life. And, I think the more times a muskie is caught, the older they get, the more weary they get of, artificial lures. Even muskies, of course, that's why one of the reasons sucker fishing and live bait fishing is so exciting and so successful is because muskies, it's live bait. They're a little easier to convince a muskie to eat a sucker than it is sometimes a hunk of ABS plastic, right? But again, it's a learned behavior. Muskies follow that. It makes them really tough to catch. But I do think this is learned, and I think they become, the word would be conditioned over time. And they can even be conditioned to things like boat noises, sonar noises, the pinging of sonars. A lot of talk has been out most recently about forward-facing sonar, how people are having difficulty catching muskies when they're just chasing them around with this sonar beam, just blasting them as they swim around, right? Well, muskies can feel that, right? They have a really sophisticated lateral line. I mean, they can feel different types of I guess I'll just call it EM radiation moving through the water, echoes and vibrations and things like that. They can feel all this stuff, right? And so they can feel and hear your sonar pings, and that might turn them off. Consider it, like this. If you're at a restaurant and, there's live music and the band is turned up a little too loud, sometimes music can be so loud, even if it's good music, it can be uncomfortable to eat. So consider the idea of you, and most folks that are listening to this know what I'm talking about. You're trying to eat something, but you're sitting next to the speaker and it's just like making your ear go deaf. That might be similar to what some muskies experience when they're getting blasted with sonar waves all the time. So, just something to consider. It makes muskies tougher to catch, more difficult to catch, to say. And, again, it's just, muskies, that's why when certain lures are new on the scene, that's why, let's face it, we all continue to collect musky lures, different colors that muskies haven't seen. They are not conditioned to these colors, right? So again, this all fits in different vibrations. When a new bucktail or a new rattle or something comes out that's a little bit different, everybody jumps on it. And a lot of times you'll see a spike in musky catches with a particular style lure until it gets used a lot. Again, that's a generality, but just something to consider when it comes to musky behavior, okay? And the next thing I really wanted to talk about here is what I'm going to call the biological approach, okay? And this is something to consider with regard to musky behavior. In that every moment a muskie is moving, okay? So, a meaningful movement, let's say. This is driven by the need to do two things, okay? So muskies move to do two things essentially, right? This is like the scene out of Jaws, okay? Where it's like, well, what do sharks need to do? Well, they eat and they propagate, okay? These are the two things muskies really need to do, right? They need to eat to sustain life, so they're gonna move to find food and eat food. And muskies are always going to, like all species, they need to pass on their genetic information, their heritable characteristics to the next generation, okay? And those are the two things that muskies really, at the end of the day, need to do. And their behavior a lot of times can really be tied to these two things, these two necessities, eating and reproducing, okay? I talked about this a little bit, but really these movements are largely, driven by water temperature, because, it's not that the water temperature makes the fish move. It's that, again, and this goes back to the second Andy that posted a question. There are two Andys there. I don't know if I mentioned it. I hope I did. But when we say linked to water temperature, these movements, well, really, we're also, the water temperature movements are, of course, really linked to the forage that they're chasing. So when that forage species, that prey species is moving in conjunction to water temperature changes, the muskies are then moving because of those movements. So everything is connected in a really cool food web in an ecosystem where everything kind of affects one another, okay? But water temperature is really important. But I do want to talk about this, and we're going to kind of start to dive in here slowly but surely into musky behavior. And I wanted to just say this. This is kind of a really cool topic. Muskies are a very, and I think you'd be surprised, all fish species, folks, at least in freshwater, in northern Wisconsin lakes that I fish, rivers, reservoirs that I fish, these species are really mobile. They are moving a lot. Especially if you're on a river system, okay? If you're on some kind of flowage, these fish species are moving from lake to lake to lake throughout the course of a season, throughout the course of many years. Muskies may, and I know this because of my own, I said this when I started this series, I'm sharing my personal experiences with you. That is my expertise, that I can share my experiences on the water. I have seen muskies doing two things. One, I know they move a lot, and I can tell you why I know that. But this is important to know, that, they're just very mobile. Originally, they're a river-dwelling species, and over time, as glaciers melted and created lakes, and they emptied rivers, and we can do a science lesson later, but the muskies move even on lakes, like actual lakes that aren't connected to river systems. Muskies are moving all the time, and it's important to understand that behavior, that they're not really sedentary creatures. There's an old school mentality that exists that says something along the lines like, oh, muskies, they're going to set up their home range and they're going to sit on that weed bed or that spot all summer long. And, when I was a kid, that's what my great uncles told me. That was how it was. That's what we, kind of knew back in those days. But with more modern technology and telemetry and radio tracking studies, we now see that, well, this is very much not true. Now, is there such a thing as a home range? Because before you type that comment in and say, oh, Chaz, hey, you're wrong. Well, yes, there is such a thing as a home range, but the home range is really not what we, used to maybe think of it as. Okay, so a home range, by the way, could be, on, the largest documented home range, by the way, on like Great Lakes, and I believe through some radio tagging studies, telemetry studies have shown musky home ranges, so to speak, of upwards of 50 miles. Imagine a muskie moving 50 miles, right? So again, not sedentary, and maybe this is blowing your mind, maybe you already knew this, okay? On river systems, easily dozens of miles, and I want to share with you this pretty cool tidbit here. One of my favorite recaptures, and we'll have to maybe do an episode. If somebody wants the recapture episode, which would be a really fun episode, one of my favorite muskie recaptures, I caught a muskie, my team has caught a muskie 3 times, okay? The muskie has been nicknamed Scarface, okay? I was the first one to catch this particular muskie in 2017, and I caught it on a particular lake, okay? My brother caught that same muskie in 2020, okay? And then I caught that muskie again in 2021. Now in 2017 and 2020, the first 2 times we caught that fish, it was caught in the same location. Like literally within 100 yards on a big body of water, within 100 yards of where we had caught it, 3 years earlier. But in 2021, this muskie, for whatever reason, was caught by me. The second time, by the way, in 2020, that muskie was caught by my brother. The third time we encountered this fish, and I caught it in July of 2021, it was 8 miles away from the previous 2 catches. Craziness. Now, why did that muskie move that far? I can't tell you that. I've had a number of recaptures that have been in that 3-mile range, 1 to 3 mile range farther away from where I initially caught them. But again, like I said, the furthest one is 8. And why muskies might do that? Maybe they're moving to where they were, maybe where they were born. Maybe it's something like salmon. A fisheries biologist, if you're watching, my friend Jordan Weeks, maybe chime in here and let me know what you think. Why muskies move this far? Maybe it's I would think probably the easiest answer is, forage availability, right? When greener pastures arise, muskies may follow a certain or they might be following a forage through a flowage or river system, and they just end up somewhere. And there's no real great explanation other than they're just following food. And muskies will follow a food source and prey on a large school of fish, maybe that's making its way through a system. That could be the answer for why muskies are moving to a certain extent. So a lot of reasons, but just wanted to throw that out there, that just as you hunt muskies, just know that from a biological perspective, they're always moving. Okay, so they're really a mobile fish species. Now, another thing I want to point out is that muskies are not the lone wolves that, oh my gosh, I gotta go back here with regard to home range. I did want to actually use the whiteboard here and show you something kind of cool. What modern studies have taught us, and what also my personal experience has showed me, is something like this, okay? I'm gonna call this spot here, this reef, I'm gonna call this A, okay? Let's say our muskie, let's say Walter the muskie, or maybe old Jingle Bells, let's say Jingle Bells loves to hunt this reef, okay? But let's say you're hunting Jingle Bells, and Jingle Bells the muskie is not on this reef on a particular night, and all the conditions align, and it's perfect. Where is old Jingle Bells? Well, if it's a big muskie, in fact, it could be any muskie. The home range of a muskie, from my understanding and what I've seen fish do, kind of goes like this. It could be A, and then B, C, and D are out over open water. So the muskie, might feed here on A, and after it's done here for, usually, a big fish might be here for 3 or 4 days, and then it moves on. And it probably spends a great majority of its, month per se, of like June or July or August. It spends a lot of its time over open water, and there's probably different, checkpoints that we as human beings are still trying to understand why a fish, again, it keeps coming back to forage movement, forage location. Why is this muskie out here? Probably because it's eating, and it's eating without being bothered by you and me casting over it 1,000 times, okay? But I think home range is oftentimes, I think a great percentage of a muskie's home range is over open water, okay? Now, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but, again, I think that's something to consider. Now, muskies, by the way, are not lone wolves, okay? There was the old adage that muskies are, they're solo predators, and this is a theme that probably dominated the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and even early 90s maybe. I don't know, but for sure, there was the lone wolf theory. I grew up reading about this in magazines, okay, old muskie hunter magazines and stuff, and it's just not true. And really, what changes this is our modern technology, guys. So on a given spot, I have seen myself now. This isn't like a number I'm just throwing out willy-nilly, okay? I have seen I think the highest number of muskies is seen on a given spot at one single fishing moment was 10 muskies that I saw. 10 different muskies. And I'm talking like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I mean, I have seen spots with just so many muskies on them sometimes that you would not believe there's this many there. And 2 hours later, guess where they are? They're gone. They're over open water here. I mean, they have kicked out, they've pushed out. They're not there. And all of a sudden, you pull up to a spot, and where'd they go? Or you can have vice versa. You pull up to your favorite spot here. Let's say it's this big reef, and you're looking around, and there's none there. You don't see any. Now, it doesn't mean you can't see them because they're hiding in these reeds. They're hiding behind a crib. That's very possible. But muskies hunt in packs. They move in and out of key feeding spots very quickly. Like I said, I have seen within, and again, I think this is pretty quick. Within 2 to 3 hours, I've seen spots, just vacated. The muskies are gone, and then they're back. 6 hours later, the whole flock of them came in for wherever. So this fleet moved out in open water, and let's say that. There's another basin here, okay? Here's another 30-foot basin here, something like that, okay? All of a sudden, these muskies, as these ones move in, maybe these ones, from a different part of the system move in to this area and feed. If this reef is the biggest reef on that lake system, you're going to have packs upon packs of muskies using that reef system, right? You want to consider a really, really good spot, a really good muskie spot, kind of similar to like your Walmart Supercenter, right? Where everybody in town goes to get their food. It's the big grocery store in your town, and lots of muskies. In fact, depending on how big this lake is here, maybe this is again 1,000 acres or something like that. You might have at a given in any given day, you might have 20, 30, 40 muskies using this spot. It's tough to say. I'm just throwing out an idea at you there, but just something to consider. Kind of cool, to think about. But I have seen this. That again, it's just this. They're not lone wolves, and they move in and out of spots all the time in packs. Now, a lot of times the packs might be 2 or 3. So this is a very drastic idea here with 10 muskies on the board. But I have seen that. I have seen a lot of five fish packs. A lot of times they're in packs of 2, packs of 3. It's not super drastic, but they do move in packs, and it's something to consider with regarding, when regarding muskie behavior. That when there's one muskie there, and how could this impact your fishing? When there's one muskie there, there's probably more than one. We say this with crappies. When I'm crappie fishing through the ice right now, I always tell my buddies, hey, you catch one crappie, I guarantee you there's like 40 or 50 of them around here somewhere, okay? So something to think about, okay? Now, is there a difference between muskies feeding, aggression, maybe aggressive behavior, and maybe curiosity when regards to follows and things like that? A little sip of my water here. So I often think about a stat that our beloved Tom Gelb, rest in peace Tom, talked about in his famous book, Musky Strategy. And I believe this number, and I did not go back, I'm going to get blasted by somebody who's another Tom Gelb fanatic, but I believe in Tom's book, he said something like that he believed through his data, and Tom was a real scientific guy, that only 8% of the time did he find that muskies were truly in a super feeding, super hyper positive mood. Most of the time he thought muskies were in a neutral to negative mood. And I think this is probably accurate. Tom, if you're shining down and looking down at this darn vlog, I think you're probably right. I think a very small percentage of the time are muskies in truly, many muskies, like more than one, are in a really good mood and feeding, and we've all, if you've been lucky enough to experience something like this where you've got back-to-back casts you're catching multiple muskies within a couple hours, you catch 3 or 4 or 5 muskies in a small period of time, you hit a very special window. But most of the time, I think muskies are in a neutral mood. And I think this has something to do primarily with their just being cold-blooded and, conserving energy. Muskies do not need to, they're not, I guess we should say this, they're not burning calories as quickly as we are as warm-blooded animals, right? We're keeping our body temperature up. We keep eating food, usually 2 to 3 times a day. We're eating food, right? To fuel our metabolism. Well, cold-blooded animals, folks, have a different type of metabolism, right? They don't need to eat as often. In fact, it's really highly debated, and studies are difficult to do on this kind of thing. How often muskies eat? Right? How often does a big muskie eat? Does it eat once a week, once a month? Well, it's tough to say, okay? But just bottom line, I think that, muskies are not feeding as often as we think, okay? I don't think they need to. I tend to think their calorie consumption is relatively low throughout a long part of the season. I'm not saying muskies don't eat a lot. I'm just saying that I don't think they eat as often as maybe some other species. And especially if they eat a large meal, if a muskie eats a 30-inch northern pike, they may not need to eat, nor can they physically eat another meal until they metabolize and break down that prey item, right? So this varies quite a bit. If a fish is, if a muskie's eating 6-inch perch, well, yeah, calorie-wise, just like you and I need calories, well, a muskie's going to need 10, I'm just going to throw a goofy number out, they're going to need 10 6-inch perch to be equivalent to what they would need calorie-wise for, eating 30-inch northern pike, okay? So depending on the forage available or depending on the prey species that a particular muskie might be eating, their feeding levels may vary. And the reason I say that is I think muskies follow a lot because they have a predatory switch that can't be turned off. I think that we talked about this earlier, that muskies are naturally inclined to follow things that are out of place. But I think this following behavior a lot of times is just conditioned because they're I guess I'm just going to come back to this conditioned idea that muskies are following. I don't think they're eating as much as we think they are. When muskies are following all the time, I think it's more instinctual, predatory nature. It's not that they are following because they're interested to eat in that particular moment. I think they're following because they can't help themselves in some way. Now, again, I might change my mind on this tomorrow, but I'm just kidding. But right now, that's just kind of where my mind is a lot of times. I think muskies follow because they're triggered into it, and that following behavior and not eating is because they've been conditioned, and or they might not need to eat even. I think it's interesting that muskies follow and don't eat when they're expending that energy. Usually predators are very efficient, and I think that expending that energy is kind of foolish in some ways, but I also think just they can't help themselves. So it's interesting stuff to think about. When muskies are following and they're not eating, this is a big importance because let's just say let's tone down our wolf pack here. Okay, let's go from 10 muskies, unfortunately, to here we go. We're going to go to 1 muskie here. Kind of on this inside turn of sorts. Okay, and what I'd like to talk about here just briefly is that when this muskie here that's sitting on this 7-foot break line here, when that muskie follows, and it doesn't even matter for whatever reason. If the muskie follows and it's not hungry, or the muskie follows and it's hungry, does it really matter? I don't know. But what matters is that you've located a fish now, okay, and that this fish is now in big trouble because you know where it's hanging most of the time, unless you do something drastic. I don't know what that might be, but if you do something, unless you do something drastic, a lot of times these fish, once they follow, from what I've seen on my electronics, is they do something like this. They follow into the boat, and then they go through a holding pattern, and they kind of meander for a little while, and they do slowly make their way back to that spot. It's very interesting to watch. They go through this holding pattern, and then so they've kind of been spooked, they followed in, let's say they didn't eat for whatever reason, and then they kind of go into this holding pattern, they meander around off structure, they eventually, usually, generally come back to where you raised them. And that's really important, because what that means is you can take advantage of those fish, which we'll talk about later in this vlog. This really highlights your hunting strategy. When do you return? Well, weather change, whether that's wind, pressure, barometric pressure change, light change. You got a storm coming in. Get on that fish. You have a moon phase, a minor period or a major period. Get on that fish. Come on, it's a slam dunk. Get back on that muskie. Make it happen, okay? So something to really think about. How does that inform your hunting strategy? Now, I want to keep going here. I got some really cool stuff I want to talk about, but another one here is muskie personality. Do muskies have personalities regarding behavior? Well, one thing that I want to talk about maybe just briefly is that I do think muskies are genetically predispositioned to either be shallow water or deep water fish. And this may change over the course of a muskie's life. Now, I don't know if we have any factual data on this, or I should say scientific data to back up this idea. I do think that all fish at certain points of their lifespan spend a large amount of time in either sanctuary, your basin sanctuary, your shallow water sanctuary. I do think that some fish spend a greater percentage of their time out here, and I do think that some fish spend a great percentage of their time here in shallow water. I think it's a genetic predisposition. I equate this something similar to introverts and extroverts. Some people love giving talks. I love talking. I love teaching. I love being in front of an audience. It gets me going. Some people would rather do anything than talk in front of an audience. I think there's statistically, I think there's something funny. There's some stat that public speaking is more feared than death for a large chunk of American citizens, something like that, which is kind of unfortunate, but it is what it is, right? So I think muskies also have something going on like that. And I kind of think of it like this, like city versus suburbs. Some people really like to be in the city. They're city people. Some people are suburb people. We're all different. I think muskies are the same way. Something to just put into your brain to think about here as you listen to this. How does this inform your hunting strategy? Well, and we've got our ABCD here. One of my famous to me, and favorite, I think I wanted to say there, muskie catches was for me, the epic hunt of a muskie I nicknamed Gadorzy, after a buddy of mine, Chris Gadorzy, that Joe Bucher and I used to fish with years ago. And we had first ran into the Gadorzy muskie in June of 2017, okay? And I remember seeing this muskie in early June, maybe it was June 12th or something, and Chris Gadorzy, that's what we nicknamed the muskie Gadorzy, the muskie was following in a glide raider. And Joe said something as Chris is working the glide raider back and forth, and Joe goes, "Ooh, Chris, that's a really big one." And Chris goes, "Yeah, Joe, holy cow, dude." And I'm running the cameras in the back of the boat, and I looked and I'm like, "Oh, that's a really big fish." And Chris couldn't get the fish to eat in June. My buddy Mike Richardson actually hooked Gadorzy in July of that year. Later on in August, which is a part of the famous Gadorzy muskie episode, I hooked old Gadorzy in the figure eight. And so that was encounter number 3, and these are all 3 months separate. And then on September 24th, 2017, at approximately 10:15 a.m. on moonrise, I caught the Gadorzy muskie on a 700 Bucher tail, Goldilocks. Not black and orange here, but this black and orange glow. But I caught Gadorzy. And what's interesting here is that I only ran into Gadorzy on a moonrise. As many times as I fished this particular spot where I caught the Gadorzy muskie, whether it was Chris Gadorzy himself or my buddy Mike Richardson or myself, I only ran into the Gadorzy muskie on a moonrise. Talk about a personality trait there, right? Something weird going on. Was the Gadorzy muskie on that particular spot you know, when I was there and I just never showed itself, I'm sure it was. But I only saw that muskie active and hungry on a moonrise scenario, okay? Which is kind of interesting. And where was the Gdorsey muskie when it wasn't feeding? I think it was on B, C, and D. I think that fish was out over the basin for a great majority of its existence, just doing what muskies do, eating forage out here, chasing schools of bait, and occasionally, for whatever reason it might be, they slip back up here into a part of their home range to eat. So, do muskies have a personality? Are they moving around like that? Absolutely. Okay. A couple other things here that I wanted to talk about. Okay. Big muskie behavior versus average muskies, okay? Large muskies, folks, have been swimming for a very, very, very long time. They've been caught many times, okay? They are survivors and they get big for a reason, okay? So does the way you hunt a muskie change depending on how big it is? Well, yes, but also no, right? So think about this. On almost every hunt, you're trying to chase the biggest fish you've seen on a given day, whether it's a 50-incher or a 30-incher, right? Whatever the biggest muskie you've seen that day, you're trying to catch that fish. And my plan of attack generally centers around the biggest fish that either myself or my clients have encountered. We're always trying to catch the biggest one, right? That's kind of what we try to do, unless you're my wife and she actually wants to catch a very, very, very tiny tiger muskie, which she wants to get a replica of, which is hilarious. Steph, I love you. You're different than, you know, that's what she likes. She wants to catch a micro muskie. We want to catch big mama muskies, big papa muskies, okay? But whatever it is, I guess, you know, the biggest fish of the day, whether it's a 50-pounder or a 36-incher, we're still operating with the intent to catch that muskie. So I am, you know, doing all of my tricks in my bag, coming at that fish at moon phases, weather changes, my cast back scenarios, and my targeting scenarios are generally the same, because I'm applying those scenarios to the biggest fish. Now, some things that do change a little bit when I've got a really big fish. Sometimes, although arguably you should do this on every fish, no matter what size, and I think that's probably true. But on big fish spots, or just big muskies in general, I sometimes have a rule where minimally, I don't care what you see. If you see nothing, you do three. You do 2 complete figure eights, regardless if you see something. Now I'm speaking from experience in that, because I've had some weird encounters with muskies that have shown up, and I've done a complete figure eight, and they were there, and I didn't know about it, and that can hurt you here in the chest. Okay, that can hurt. Okay, so. When the fish is really big, my castback scenarios can change a little bit, because the percentage of time you run into big fish is, let's just admit it, right? At least in northern Wisconsin where I fish, it's low. We're talking big fish like 46 inches and above, 45 inches and better. Truly big fish in northern Wisconsin, right? Your 45s to 50 plusers, you don't run into them all the time, right? And when you do, they become a big priority. We don't, I'm not even, I'm making sure I'm within striking distance of a fish like that at all times. We're not messing around, okay? A fish like that doesn't show up all the time. And they don't stay on spots all the time either. Big fish just don't hang on spots as long as the little ones do. I don't know what it is, but in my experience, big muskies just don't hang around for more than to me, from what I have seen, it's like 3 days. I typically find that big muskies will hang on a spot for like 3 days, and then they're gone. They're out here. They're doing something else. Or they ain't showing themselves, okay? But kind of interesting. So an old adage that, again, Bucher and I came up with back in the day is and I apply this, though, this is what I mean yes and no about, does it change whether it's a big muskie or an average size muskie? it doesn't really matter, because the old thing we used to say was if they come to you, you're going back to them. I don't like to camp on a spot per se. I'm not like a big fan of like just sitting there and pounding a spot for 2 hours. I think that's kind of a waste of time to a certain extent. I shouldn't say waste of time. There's a time and place for every one of these tactics. I take that back. But I'm oftentimes trying to be mobile myself, fishing for a fish that's kind of mobile, which is kind of funny. Hopefully we're not 2 ships passing in the night, but you get the point. Like, they do stay on spots long enough, and I do try to be mobile when I'm fishing them. But back to the point, if a big muskie's on a spot, I'm gonna try to, if it's a really big fish, if that fish leaves, there's a chance you're never gonna see that fish again. Ever. Ever, ever, ever. I'm talking about big, big fish. In those situations, my cast back scenarios kind of change, and I will continue to fish that fish if it continues to show itself to me. Now, if that muskie leaves and it doesn't follow, I'm likely going to be out. I'm not going to overpressure that fish. What I'm trying to say is if a big muskie follows in, figure eights, and it darts off, and it's really big, and I cast back and it follows in again and darts off, you better believe I'm going to take a third cast at that fish. And if it follows in a third time and it figure eights and it darts off, I'm going to keep going until I exhaust that opportunity. I am not going to see a big fish once and say, whoa, that was the biggest fish I've seen all season. I'm going to leave you alone now for 4 hours. No, I'm going to try. Now, does that change on an average size muskie? Not really sometimes. If they come to me, if they keep coming to me, I'm going to keep coming to them. Okay? So, it's you come to me, I come to you, right? It's a two-way road. And when you stop, I will back off and reassess what I'm doing. So, interesting. Another thing to be thinking about here is this, that big muskies usually, at least from what I've experienced, they usually only show up when something unique stays in place. This is really interesting as far as muskie behavior is concerned. Big muskies really, truly just only show up when something unique is going on. Now, generally speaking, that is your full moon and new moon weeks. So you've got 2 weeks a month. Really, you've got 10 days total a month when your chance of catching a big fish is truly good, okay? New moon and full moon. Time of the season too, right? You've got these transitions between like late summer and early fall. That's a great big fish time. Or just late fall, pre-ice up, Cisco spawn going on. That's a great time. And you've got that like early June phase when just, I don't know what it is about big muskies. They just seem to be kind of perking up after the spawn, and you got kind of a surge of bigger fish being caught in that early June phase. So there's a timing thing to this, but I just wanted to say that, big muskies, again, if you're listening to this trying to kind of think about, your own spots and what you're doing, it's usually just really obvious when big muskies are present. Like when there's a big one there, you're going to usually find out, right? Because there's, a lot of times there's not going to be a little one on the prime structure. It's going to be big dog, and big dog is going to box everybody out of the prime structure, okay? I have had 2 muskies follow at once, and I've had the smaller one coming, and the bigger one was behind it, and that little guy, pooh, it got out of the way pretty quick. It was also really freaky to see that happening too. But yeah, big muskies will assert their dominance on the prime structure. Now, maybe that prime structure is, maybe that's the point here. Maybe you got a prime structures here. So you've got a smaller muskie here and a smaller muskie here, and big dog is here, okay? And a lot of times that's the case when you got a wolf pack of muskies and there's a big one in there. They're going to kick the little ones off to the sides on the B and the C structures, and the big dog's going to take the A spot. A lot of times that's how it works. So kind of interesting there. But really, because big muskies are so special, like truly big ones, again, I'm talking 45 inches or better here in northern Wisconsin, you've got to treat these scenarios, they're important things, okay? It's an important time in your day, because it's an important time in your season. You don't get this opportunity all the time. So, a lot of times I just plan my entire day around that single fish. Every move I make is made with the idea of targeting that fish at any time I want to. I see any type of change. I see that wind go from southwest to west, barely noticeable, pop, I'm back on it. If you've got a barometric pressure change, all of a sudden you notice it gets, or you get humidity spikes, pop, I'm right back on that fish. I'm gonna check that fish when things change, and I'm going to exhaust my opportunities, because when the night falls and the next day comes, that fish could be long gone, could be B, C, and D. Not that you can't go troll over a big basin, but it's tough to find fish. At least that one you wanted when they're out here, okay? Bottom line, folks, and first of all, I really hope you've enjoyed some of these topics we're bringing up here on musky behavior. And this is just a general, a few general ideas I kind of tabbed out here for you on this show as far as musky behavior. But here's the kind of the crux of the whole thing, okay? It's finding a weakness in the armor. The behavior of muskies can be very, very bizarre and difficult for us. Again, I should say can be. Muskellunge behavior, animal behavior oftentimes has a lot of predictability to it, but there's a lot of other pieces to that behavior puzzle that we just don't understand, okay? But the predictability part is the thing that you want to kind of consider when it comes to musky behavior. Do we understand muskies inside and out? Well, of course we don't. Do we understand why they do a lot of the things they do? Of course we don't. Do we know that muskies are more prone to being caught before a major weather change? Or after a major weather system is moving through? Yes, take that to your advantage. Do you know that sunrise and sunset make it muskies, their armor becomes a little weaker in those moments? Those major light changes from darkness to light at sunrise and from light to dark at sunset, that seems to trigger an instinctual feeding mechanism in the brain, or in the whatever you want to call it for these fish. Take advantage of it. It is a behavior that can be targeted by the angler. Okay, as complex as these fish are, it's a behavior that can be targeted by the angler to achieve success. And you want to schedule your day around these times if and when you can, depending on how much time you have on the water. Okay. You want to time your day around a particular sometimes it's a particular fish, sometimes it's a particular location. So for example, if I found that this is, maybe a smaller spot here, and I found that there was there were two really nice muskies hanging on this little point up in this northwest bay, okay? I'm going to plan my day to be on these fish if I can at sunrise. I'm going to be on them at sunset. I'm going to be on them at moonrise and moonset if I can. If I got a weather change coming in, guess where I'm going to be? I'm going to be on those fish. If I want them, if they're big enough, if they're driving me crazy, I'm going to be there. And I'm going to make it happen. And I'm going to find a way to, get into their brain, so to speak, right? I'm going to use my electronics to track their food source. I'm going to try to find some weakness in the armor and get that fish to go. Okay, and that's the whole idea here. Talking about musky behavior really just comes down to, how can we look at these behaviors and these traits and use it to our advantage, right? Again, I'll wrap this up by saying this. We don't understand everything, but we do know some things, and the obvious ones tend to be the weaknesses. Okay, and they're obvious because we can catch fish when we're fishing under those conditions and when muskies are behaving in a certain way. And so a lot of times you look to musky behavior as that, it's that next piece connecting you to that moment that you want so desperately, so badly at times. Smelling the slime, holding the fish up to the camera for a quick photo, and then holding that tail on the release and seeing that beautiful fish swim away to grow bigger and stronger, to be caught by another lucky angler someday. That's what we want. And, of course, in this series so far, we've talked about structure and cover and where to find muskies, how muskies relate to structure and cover. We talked about seasonal musky, seasonal musky movements based on water temperature. And now we're talking about, okay, now you know muskies, this is structure, there's weed cover on this, it's July, you know there's muskies here on this structure, hiding in this cover because there's food here. And now we're talking about muskie behavior and what muskies might be kind of doing and why they're here and how to take advantage of that behavior to catch more of them. So, with that said, guys, that is going to wrap up our fourth installment of the Whiteboard series, and this one being on musky behavior. I really hope that you have enjoyed this whiteboard video today, or whenever or wherever you're watching this. And if you don't have time to listen to this some hour and 15 plus minute vlog, listen to it while you're driving to work if you're interested. My podcast is Musky Therapy. It is my podcast. You can find the audio for this whiteboard vlog on the Musky Therapy podcast. So it's another way that you can listen to this. You can study up, even if it's just for pure entertainment. Take a listen to it there. But there you have it, folks. I really can't thank everybody enough for listening and for watching and just being a part of the Musky Mastery family. You folks are just truly incredible. I don't know what to say other than thank you, because you guys rock, and I really hope you're enjoying our content that we put out, and there's more of it coming. So I think as I end just about every video, thanks for watching.